Okay.
All right. Shannon, are you good? Tanya, are you good? Melissa, are you good? All right. What am I forgetting? Tanya, you want to remind me of anything? We're good? Record, yes. We're live, so we don't have to hit record anymore. All right, good. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our monthly business speaker event. We are so excited. We've got a wonderful speaker with us with a very interesting and a background, and really excited to have her with us. Before we get into our conversation, quick introductions. My name is Rashid Mahalha. I'm the economic advisor that's helping coordinate the GROW program, Growth in the Rural Ozarks. It's a program that helps support economic and community development currently across 9 communities in southern central Missouri. So so glad you can join us. This program, our monthly business speaker series, is brought thanks to our amazing community partners and chamber partners. I want to highlight 4 specific chambers and leaders. In Herman, we've got Melissa Lensing. In Eldon, we've got Aaron Rower. In Buffalo, we've got Tanya Watson. And in Aurora, we have Shannon Walker. So thank you so much for helping coordinate, promote these programs in your respective communities. The reason we've set these conversations up is because we recognize that small, mid-sized business owners oftentimes do not have the ability to access content, knowledge, information on what's going on and how they can help improve what's going on in their business. So hopefully this is a nice, simple an hour where the business leaders, whether you're in for-profit business, public sector business, you can learn a few things about new topics. One more really important point I want to highlight is last year, we had several conversations that focused on the CARES Act dollars, PPP funding. We would be remiss if we didn't make a specific point and say those grants have been opened up again. Please make sure that if you're a small, mid-sized business owner, that you're reaching out to your local bank and asking them exactly what the requirements are to apply for those grants. The process is incredibly straightforward. And so please have those conversations directly. It's a great way to access federal support. I know many of you have seen some tough last many months, so hopefully this is a way in which your business can be supported. One more item we want to do is just quickly share with you some of the tools that we use for our Growth in the Rural Ozarks program. One is the Grow Ozarks platform. It's a great platform that's built to share the work that's going on in our different communities. Certainly encourage you to look at it and find ways to get involved in your respective communities. The other item is the Business 911 platform. So you can go to business911.org. And if you click on Grow Missouri, it will take you to this platform where you can see some support elements that are there that can hopefully complement what you're looking for. And in that platform, you will find all of our recordings. So today we have Callie Myers who's joined us. You can see all of our previous recordings here as well. Some really great content that you can look at. And like I said, certainly worth looking at the content related to the PPP, CARES Act funding, etc. Okay, so with that, let's talk about today's conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about community engagement, marketing, outreach. Many of our GROW communities, many of the leaders in our communities talk about how difficult it is to get local citizens businesses trying to get engaged with their customers, clients, how to create those relationships, how to build those relationships, and to help us think about some of these opportunities, some of the challenges that get in the way, and potentially even some tools and ideas that we can use to ease our world is Callie Myers. Callie, good morning, good afternoon. Excellent. So Callie's with us, and Callie has this great experience. She learning a little bit about her background. It's fascinating. She was a biology major, and then she traveled all over the world in the software space. Eventually ended up being a marketing executive at Bass Pro, and currently she's the executive director at Carthage Visitors Bureau, and sort of private sector experience, now working in a public sector space. And we thought that her experiences could be really helpful for many of our audience members who tend to be both in the public sector and private sector. So very excited to have her. I was also very much surprised at the fact that she grew up in a large household and did not have a television growing up. She mentioned that she was 14 when she got her first television, which I thought was interesting because as an immigrant from India, I thought we got our first television at 10, which I thought was really pushing it. And so Callie's officially outdone me, and it's fascinating. So, all right, without further ado, Callie, welcome to the conversation. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you, Rishu. I'm super excited about having this conversation. I've only been in this position for 6 months, so it's really been kind of baptism by fire in a very good way. And so having these conversations is super helpful to me as I'm learning and as I'm kind of getting my arms around my new position and this organization. But also learning that as I have conversations with people, that there are lots of things that are kind of outside the norm that I might be able to bring to the table when I'm having these interactions with people that are not necessarily familiar with the big corporate world and how those things work and how that they can be translated and how that they can be applied to your day-to-day activities, whether or not you're a small business owner or whether you're working on a civic level. There's a lot of big corporate machine ideas that can be shrunken down and reapplied if you're just kind of creative about it.
So you're saying that obviously private sector is really great at building sophisticated marketing strategies, and you're saying even though nonprofits and small mid-sized organizations may not have the full breadth of marketing support, they can take a lot of those lessons and apply them in a sort of in a mini form. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I think sometimes the marketing as a term or media as a term feels so big. Sure. It feels like a lot, and it is a lot. But you can break it down into small, manageable pieces, and once you do that, then you're really off to the races, and can get a lot of things done in a relatively short period of time.
Excellent. Okay, so let's introduce Callie to our audience. So just tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in the marketing environment. So, grew up as a child, you were like, marketing is what I want to do. This was like a childhood dream, or when did this idea first come across your consciousness?
It's one of those things that I just kind of fell into it. And I think that one of the things that my parents were really good at as when we were kids was helping us to figure out the things that we were good at, the things that we were passionate about, where our talents lie, and really fostering those things and bringing us along in a way that those things are brought to the forefront. And as an adult now in my early 40s, that I feel pretty confident about the things that I'm good at. I feel pretty confident about where my talents lie. And once you get that kind of figured out, then you really have all kinds of options. And so, when I was in college, I had this really great advisor, Dr. Keith Martin, shout out. I had changed majors several times. I just couldn't quite figure out my place or where I was supposed to be. And I thought maybe I would go to medical school, and that just wasn't happening. And he set me down and he just said, Callie, you've got to stop trying to major in a job. Major in what you love to study. And so once I shifted gears and stopped trying to figure out my career at 20 and started to focus on what I love to study and the things that I was good at, he said, you'll fall into the right thing. You just will. And it's some of the best advice I've ever been given, is to stay in the space in which you're passionate, and that you will fall into the right things. So, and that's exactly what's happened. So yeah, as you mentioned, I majored in environmental conservation. I thought that I would save the rainforest and the trees, and that I would lobby on Capitol Hill and accomplish all sorts of great things for the environment. And, you know, but that's not at all what happened. But I wrote a paper for the, I wrote a paper that was published and it was about drilling the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And then from there, I was, my first big girl job I was offered was at a grant writing firm. They needed a science-based grant writer. And so that's kind of how I got started. And my clients were in areas that were of high minority rates and low income rates. So I was working with community college. My first client was Malcolm X Community College in Chicago. And we helped get them a grant to build a science lab. And that's where I really got bit by kind of the community level work and the aspect of there are things that you can do that'll make a difference in your own community in your lifetime. And that's kind of addictive. So yeah, I've weaved around a little bit, but have found my way back to that community level work. And like I was saying before, when you're in your space in which you're passionate and where your talents lie, it's fun, or it can be really fun.
Good for you. Good for you. Love that advice. I've written it down, and I'm going to be sure to share that with my kids as well. Love it. So let's talk about marketing. Sure. Where do you even begin? Where it's such a overwhelming topic. Social media, Twitter, Facebook, writing blogs, advertising, PR. It's, your head spins. And again, many of our listeners are small organizations, 1 or 2 person shop. How do you carve space and time to think about this? So can you just help us understand this world? Like, where do you even begin to think about, where does a small business owner start to think about marketing in a more organized way? Sure.
Well, I think the most important thing where you have to start is to figure out who your audience is. Who are you trying to reach? That's step one. And that may be super obvious depending on what you're doing. If you're running a coffee shop, then you want to reach people who like to drink coffee. And once you figure out who your audience is, then you can start to decide where to put your marketing efforts, where to put your marketing dollars, where to put your marketing time. But the most important thing is that you have to be all in. It's so important that everything you put out and that everything exists in a digital space is correct, is current. There are no broken links. There are no bad phone numbers. You don't have something that says news and it's an article from 3 years ago. You just have to be very, very careful that if you're going to put things in the digital space, that it's current and correct. You got to start there. Otherwise, just don't do it at all.
Sure.
Because if you become a source that is not accurate, is not current, then you're not a trusted source, and now you've messed with your brand. So sure. I would say those are the most important things to start with. Who's your audience, and then making sure that you're going to prioritize your efforts, and that you're setting aside the time to do it. That it's not just something that you're doing,
sure,
as a side project.
So know your customer, know your audience, make sure your content is current and it's correct, and then prioritize where and how you spend time in this realm. Okay, that obviously that makes a ton of sense. So help us now connect the dots between public sector and private sector. So you were working for Bass Pro. Give us a sense for what you were doing there and what you're doing in your current role in the marketing realm. And then the next question that I'm going to ask you is, how do you think about these three topics you just mentioned at Bass Pro and at at the Visitors Bureau?
Yeah, so obviously the position that I'm in right now, I have fewer resources, or at least on the surface it would appear so. But what's interesting about a community is those small communities like Carthage is if you are proactive about it, it's pretty easy to fill in the blanks. So I'm not great at finance. That's not a strong point for me. I'm not great at bureaucratic red tape. That's not a strong suit for me. But the good news is I don't have to be great at all of those things, even though on the surface it might appear that I should in order to get all of those things move forward. Because obviously my organization needs to have finance, needs to have the ability to work in that bureaucratic world. But again, going back to figuring out what you're good at and figuring out what you're passionate about. So I know that I'm good at these things. So where are the places in which I am lacking? So once I've identified that, now I have to go find those people that are really good at those things and surround myself with those people. So I have a really amazing board of directors, thankfully, who fill in a lot of those gaps and who have the occupational diversity to make me a fully rounded person that can run an organization. Does that make sense, Rishu?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that that's important, is that understanding, like in the big corporate machine, in that world, you have all of those different departments and you have people who specialize in all those things. But just because you're not in that big machine, you're in a small community or you're in a small organization, those resources are still there. You have to go and find them. And it's amazing to me how people are ready and willing to be part of what you're doing. If you're enthusiastic about it, if you're passionate about it, and if you think what you're doing is great work that needs to exist in the world. So I think that surrounding yourself with great people who are good at the things that you're not good at is super important. And you can do that outside of that being built into your structure.
Interesting. Got it. So in a large organization, you have access to more resources, so you can get a lot done that way. Mm-hmm. But if you're smaller, more nimble, potentially in a public sector, then really finding ways in which you can find the support outside of your organization is a great way for people to get engaged, because a lot of times community members are looking for involvement. So that's how you're offsetting not having a big bank account with a board and supporters of the cause.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So tell us about how you used to think about, again, going back to the 3 points you said: know your audience, stay current and correct, and then prioritization. How did you think about those at Bass Pro? And then how do you think about those in your current role?
So, that's a big one. I'll have to pull that apart for a second. So I guess going back to kind of having all of those departments and having all of those resources, I thought about things in terms of internally, and I didn't really get outside of that world a whole lot, other than going from one campus to another or one property to another. I didn't necessarily have that that need or even the instinct really to look outward. So now I do, which is great. And being able to pivot from having all those resources to needing to gather them and kind of to bring them all together. What's nice though is that things can move a lot faster in these smaller worlds. There's not a lot of having to fill out a lot of forms or put in a lot of requests, or it needs to go through 17 different layers of things. And in that big corporate world, that makes sense, and those things need to exist. But when you're not in that, you can move a little bit faster, and so that's been really fun, is to be able to kind of run and gun. Yeah. Got it.
So, who is your audience now at the at the Visitors Bureau? How do you? Let's start with the first. So, who's the audience that you've narrowed in and say, this is who we should be marketing and promoting ourselves to in Carthage?
So it's interesting, and I think this would go back to kind of what we were saying before in knowing your audience. And what I have found here is that if tourism is like number 84 on a list of 1 to 100 of things that you need to get done, like here in Carthage, we're on like number 4. So what we have determined as an organization is that we've kind of shifted our focus of our audience. One might think that on the surface, our audience is outside of Carthage, that we're trying to attract visitors, which is true, we absolutely are. But more importantly, we have to build some foundational things first, because if people who live in Carthage don't love Carthage, then it's going to be very difficult for me to convince people who don't love Carthage to come here. So really building that community culture and building the community first, and to make sure that we have all of those pieces in place before we can necessarily market outward. So that's what's interesting when you go through the process of knowing who you should be marketing to, who your audience is it may not be exactly who you think it's going to be on the surface, and it may be in phases. So yeah, in moving through those phases, right now we're working community level to make sure that we're building that community pride, and that we're building the community narrative, and that the branding is streamlined, and that everybody's kind of using the same language, and that we're all on the same page. So there's a lot of foundational work being built here, and it's just so vital to your mission. You have to get all of your foundation built before you can move forward. So that's where we are, is building that foundation first.
Got it. That's great. That's really neat. And so for those who may not be familiar with what a Visitors Bureau does, can we just take a half a step back? Can you just explain, what is the organization? What's the mandate? And then, the marketing efforts will make more sense for folks to understand. Sure.
Typically, a Visitors Bureau is your tourism office, and it's either a part of your city organization or it's contracted out from the city. And our mandate is pretty wide. It's pretty vague, and it's pretty much just to promote Carthage. And we want to attract visitors. We want to attract overnight visitors. Sure, is important, but we're not at that level yet, because we've got to get that foundation built first.
Got it. So as you're taking over this organization, give us a sense for what was there and how are you, again, the focus of today's conversation is marketing. So from a marketing, branding, positioning perspective, I mean, it's a really powerful insight that you shared, which is step one, before we try to get others to our community, let's just make sure our community is spending, if family spending $10 extra a month in the community, that's real economic lift. So, and I believe that kind of an insight translates to the private sector too. And the way I would think about it is, before you go try to acquire the next client or customer, how are you best serving your current customers? Is there a way in which you can have your existing customer spend an extra $1 to $10 with you, and especially in time of COVID that we saw, a lot of spending became a lot more localized. So, where were you when you took over the role, and where does one even begin as you start to, frame this opportunity?
Sure. So, from a marketing perspective, it was really just looking at what existed and determining whether or not those things needed to be updated, if those things needed to be changed in some way, if all of those pieces were already in place. And so, our first initiative, one of our first initiatives was a complete website rebuild, and we're almost done with it. I'm so excited. But you have to have those foundational pieces in place before you can really take off. So it was just kind of an assessment of what already existed and what we needed to do in order to make sure that we're relevant, make sure that everything's current and correct again, and before moving forward. So we have spent a lot of time on branding. We've spent a lot of time on logos. We've spent a lot of time on websites and making sure that we're getting that branding piece correct. And then secondarily, in getting to know our audience and getting to know who we're marketing to, we just have done a lot of just kind of playing with social media and determining what kinds of things creates engagement for this specific audience. What's difficult about social media is there's not a great playbook that everyone can use. It is definitely a case-by-case basis. And so a lot of times you have to get creative and kind of throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. So we have one Facebook page that's for kind of the premier community event. It's called Food Truck Friday, and it happens several months a year, and lots of food trucks come to this specific park, and it's very, very popular in the community. The engagement that happens on the Food Truck Friday social channels versus the engagement that happens on my Visit Carthage channels is very, very different. The audience is very, very different, but I didn't know that until we just started throwing a bunch of things out to see what would happen. The Food Truck Friday people love memes. They love things that make them laugh. They love lighthearted stuff. My Visit Carthage people, they love history. They love vintage, throwback, and those are the kinds of things that create engagement. But we only started to learn those things by being creative and being willing to kind of being willing to fail, being willing to have some things flop. So I would say that as you start to get into your social media and you're learning who your audience is, it's okay to just kind of throw some stuff out that you're not too sure about, you know, and to figure out what works.
I don't want to make an overgeneralization, but I imagine that if you're a large organization with lots of resources, you'd spend a lot of time doing sort of understanding the voice of the customer, understanding who they are, what they are, research and analysis. And so I guess one of the tidbits that I'm picking up here is you're saying you may not have time to do that. You may need to move a little faster. So rather than spending a lot of time analyzing and surveying, et cetera, just try 3 things out and see which of the 3 things works better. And maybe all 3 will work, and each of the 3 will work well for a different audience. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think what I'm saying is just don't be afraid to try some things that might be kind of out of the box for how you would normally behave in your marketing space.
Got it. What and that's a really interesting strategy, which it's very unintuitive for me, which is you have a Visit Carthage Facebook page. I would think that inherently you want to create as many likes and activity on that one page so people are seeing lots of content, but for you to sort of step away from that page and create a totally different page and almost from scratch, you know, first like, second like, 100th like, it seems like that would be a lot more effortful. So what prompted that? Why didn't you just keep one, one platform?
Well, again, once you start to figure out that you've got a different audience, then you have to serve that audience in the best way that you can. And so if you're not getting a lot of activity from a specific audience in what you're doing, you're going to have to try something new.
Got it.
You know, you're going to see a lot more engagement from your younger crowd on different social channels. You know, high school kids are not on Facebook, but they're definitely on Instagram, they're definitely on TikTok, and they're definitely on Snapchat. So figuring out a way to direct your marketing to your audience or to your age group is something that's super important. And sometimes that requires having different channels. However, I've got good news for you. One of the things that is very, very valuable, and I would recommend everyone do this if you're not doing this already, it is possible to not have to go to Facebook or go to Twitter and then go to Instagram and post these things 17 different places. So I use a tool that's called Hootsuite, H-O-O-T-E, hoot, like an owl, hoot, suite. And that brings all of your channels together on one screen. You can see all of your stream, you can see all of your engagement. It's not terribly expensive. There's a free 30-day trial. I would recommend that you try it. And then you can also schedule all of your media. So I may only spend Monday on social media because I can schedule it out for the entire week. But finding a tool like Hootsuite that brings all of your media channels together so that you're doing it in one spot is invaluable. It's such a time saver. So I would highly, highly recommend that you use that tool or use a tool that's like it, rather than having all of those tabs open or doing several posts at a time.
Sure, that's great. That's a great tip. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying, you know, for those times when you want to have the same message across multiple platforms, Hootsuite's a great tool, but also pay attention to the fact that different platforms cater to different audiences.
Right.
So in those scenarios, make sure that you're, you know, one's a more fun, more casual tone, one's a more formal tone.
Right.
Do you find that difficult? For if I try to put myself in that situation, I find that I lean towards one tone that I have, right? To fabricate a more casual tone or more formal tone would be very unnatural for me.
Sure.
How do you deal with that?
So I think I look at it in terms of I'm having a direct conversation with someone. And while my voice is going to be relatively the same in every conversation that I have today, the person in front of me is going to change a little bit of how I interact. The way that I interacted with my kids over breakfast this morning is a little bit different than the way I interacted in my first meeting today, but it's still me and I'm still using the same voice and I'm still going to have, you know, the same colloquialisms or the same, the same Callie words that I might use more often than other words. You know, I still use the same vocabulary and those sorts of things. I'm just talking to a different person. When I'm talking to you, I have a little bit different engagement strategy than I do when I'm talking to my 14-year-old who, don't get me started.
Got it.
It's still me the whole time. So I think I just try to think of the audience as maybe a person or a couple of people and think of them in those terms. When I'm on Facebook, I'm thinking, you know, that I'm speaking to my mother, that I'm speaking to my aunt, and then I'm speaking, you know, to people that I went to high school with. It's, you know, instead of thinking of you're sending it out into the void and you hope people see it, think of it as a direct message. Think of it as a personal conversation that you're having, and that's how you kind of keep that tone together, but also you're able to direct it to different audiences. Does that make sense?
It does. Let me translate what you're saying to a potential audience member that may be on our call today. So say I'm a small restaurant owner that's listening to this conversation, trying to make sense of, okay, what do I take away and how do I apply this? I think what I'm hearing is if you don't have sort of a cohesive way in which you're thinking about marketing, maybe like 1 week, just look at your audience. Who's walking in, who's ordering what, and you say, okay, I've got, you know, senior citizens that are eating early in the evening time frame. I've got, you know, at lunch, I see a few more business people come in. On the weekends, I see families come in. So I'm kind of, okay, there's maybe 3 different audiences that I want to talk to. Maybe there's the same thing I want to tell them, but I think what I'm hearing you say is once you have a hint or a sense of where your audiences are, think about what do they want to hear from you, and then figure out how to connect with them. Am I right so far?
Yeah, as individuals rather than as unnamed groups. To think about it as people that you know, people that are in your community, because they certainly are.
Yeah. And I really like that point. So you can almost set it up where if it's Twitter, I'm putting 2 or 3 photographs of, on Twitter, I'm talking to, let's just say business professionals. So here's 2 or 3 of my customers that I know come in every week. I'm literally putting up a photograph that says, when I tweet, I'm talking to that person. On Facebook, maybe I'm talking to moms, right? Or maybe family members or something like that. On maybe it's Instagram or TikTok. And then I can. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
So where does, maybe taking a step back from this zone, how do you think about social media and other marketing stuff? So I'm running a business. I don't have a lot of time. I have 1 hour a week. Right. I have 1 hour a week to jam as much marketing as I can. How do I think about time management and marketing?
Right. So I think what's important to do is to, at least for me, I have specific times of the week and specific blocks of time in which I'm focusing on certain things. On Mondays, I spend a lot of time on managing social. And I know that on Mondays, that's what I'm going to do. So I would say if you have an hour a week that you have planned that hour, and that you, as you're moving through your week, maybe you're jotting down some ideas or keeping notes in your phone as things come to you, the content ideas, pictures, or information that you want to share, that you're keeping kind of a running list, so that when you do sit down to do it, that it's not now what, to kind of be pre-planning and to kind of have that going on in your head. And what is really helpful is if you have content that you're keeping and a database that you're keeping. So instead of saying, I need to post a picture, what could I take a picture of? That you're constantly taking photos and you're keeping a database. So when you sit down to do your social that 1 hour a week, you've already got those photos on hand. And to be thinking in those terms all of the time, thinking in those marketing terms consistently and as you're moving through your day, rather than it being, a footnote or an afterthought. Because if it's an afterthought, then it just ends up being bad. And if it's bad, you just shouldn't do it at all. So,
okay.
But in terms of what kind of marketing you should be doing, whether it's print or whether it's radio or whether it's, digital or whatever your marketing method is, that goes back to, again, knowing your audience. And, like when I'm pushing Route 66 stuff, I know that I'm talking to an older audience. I know that I'm talking to an audience that likes vintage cars. So I'm much more likely to place magazine ads or to do things in print for that audience. So again, go back to square one, where you got to figure out who am I marketing to, and how do they interact throughout their day? Are these people that have a flip phone? Are these people who, are planning their trip well before they leave their house? Are they looking at TripAdvisor, and figuring out how the people that you're trying to communicate with, how the people that you're trying to market to you, how do they go about their day? Again, think about them as a person that you know, and market to that person.
That's great. Really love that. That's good. And you said it as a sub bullet, but I think that's a really important point too, which I believe you said, is better to not do anything than to do something that's subpar. Why is that?
If you come to my website looking for information, and I say events, and you click on events and there's nothing on the calendar, or it's just old events, or if it says news and you click on news and this is old news, or it's not current, or you click on a link and it's broken and it takes me nowhere. Now I've damaged our trust. Now you don't trust me as a broker of information. And once that happens, you've damaged your brand. So you just have to be very, very intentional about your marketing when you're doing it, because it is such an extension of what you're doing as a whole. Whether you like it or not, marketing is very, very important to what you're doing. But if you're not going to do it well, if you're not going to be intentional about it and make sure that everything is accurate, everything is correct, everything is current, you're going to ultimately damage your brand in the long run.
Got it. Love it. This is incredible insights. What would you say have been some of your most proud marketing accomplishments, whether it was because of just pure genius, planned, executed well, and everything turned out exactly as you wanted, or completely accidental, where you're going for this and you ended up here and you're like, oh, that was even better than what I thought. But how would you to share some stories with us?
So the most fun thing that's happened since I've come here has been completely accidental. And I've learned so much about our audience and about our community from doing things that I wouldn't normally have done in my previous position. I had some grant money that came across that I had to spend, and really, really quickly. I had to get it out the door fast. And so I got cold called by a billboard guy, and he came in and I was like, okay, I have this much money. And he was like, oh, well, I can give you 55 billboards with that much money. And so we got out a map and we just did some very generic visit Carthage, really beautiful digital work. And it was digital billboards and static billboards. I would have said prior to this, I would not have budgeted for billboards. I would have said that they're silly and that there's no way to measure the ROI. And you don't know whether or not it's driving there's just no way to measure. So, but because I just happened to have grant money and he just happened to walk in at the right time on the right day. So now currently there are billboards all over Northwest Arkansas, and they're all over the place. But what is really interesting is not necessarily that I can measure the ROI from people seeing them and deciding to visit Carthage. What's really interesting is how much it has created community pride when people are traveling around. Just this morning, I ran into the coffee shop around the corner to get coffee before we started our first meeting, and the gal that was making my coffee, she's like, "Hey, I was in Northwest Arkansas and I saw some billboards and I really love them and I just really appreciate your efforts." And it's just, I've had people on the road call me and say, "Is this one of your billboards? It looks amazing." I think that's been really fun, is that I would not have expected that to have such a big impact locally on our community. And that's when I really started to figure out, okay, if we can foster and cultivate a culture of people who really love Carthage, who live in Carthage, then we can really knock it out of the park with trying to extend that message outward. So when you love where you're from, when you're proud of your community, then you tend to talk about it a lot, and you tend to engage with people who aren't from here that maybe are visiting. So yeah, the billboard thing has been a huge surprise, and not completely unexpected with regard to how much it has driven community engagement.
Excellent.
So, that's been a big one. Secondarily, just some of the stuff, some of the engagement things that we've done. One of my staffers is local to Carthage. She graduated from Carthage High School. I'm from an adjacent community, so I don't know a lot of the Carthage history, but it's just really interesting, some of the things that she has suggested sharing that I thought were silly and probably wouldn't drive much engagement that have just absolutely taken off. There's this bridge on one side of town that if you go over it a little fast, you come down it quickly and it kind of takes your breath, you know what I'm saying? So the locals are very familiar with this bridge. I was not familiar with this bridge, but there's a controversy over what it's called. And some people call it the wee bridge, like wee. And some people call it like the tummy tickle hill or something, because it tickles, I don't know. Anyway, so she threw up a Facebook post, which was a picture of the bridge, and said, "What do you guys call this?" And it drove engagement for weeks. It drove engagement into the tens of thousands. It was incredible, but I never would have thought that that would have driven engagement. But what that told us about our audience is that our audience loves the local things that are kind of kitschy, that are kind of unique to the community, the things that you might remember from being a child. The engagement that we got was really interesting. People were talking about like how, you know, they drove over it in high school on a double date, and, you know, the double date, the girl in the front seat, she like flew out of her seat, and I guess she was wearing a hairpiece and it stuck to the top of his car. And so like all of these amazing stories came from just talking about this one little, I would have thought was a nothing. But I think it's important to figure out a way to drive engagement with your audience. And once you start to get that engagement, make sure that you are personally engaging, that you are liking or hearting or commenting on every comment that you get, and to interact with your audience, and to be a conversation rather than you just putting forth information and hoping something happens. So to figure out a way to, once you start to get a little engagement, if you get a comment, you should be right on top of it. And you should make it a priority to have your notifications on and to engage with people as it happens, or at the very, very least within 24 hours to drive those conversations. Because once you're having a conversation and it becomes personal, now you've really got something, because ultimately at the end of the day, this is all about relationships and building relationships and building trust for your brand and building trust for your organization or for your business. And once you've built that, then you're really, really in a good spot to succeed. So I would say that's just super important, to make sure that you're thinking about that and thinking about media, thinking about social media, or thinking about any of your marketing efforts as engagement, as conversations, and as building relationships with your audience and building that trust. And once you've got that established, you'll be in a really good spot.
Good. I love it. Love it. This is great insights. Okay. I've got a whole bunch of notes here, but I want to stop asking all the questions and see if any of our chamber leaders have any thoughts, reactions, if you wouldn't mind, Shannon, Tanya, Melissa, I don't know if Aaron joined us. Please, if you wouldn't mind turning your cameras on, I would love to extend the conversation and have you guys chime in with any thoughts that you have. And as you're doing that, I will maybe ask one more quick question. So I know one of the questions we often get is, folks that don't do social media a whole lot, there's always this concern of the negative conversation, right? So things have a way of going sideways quickly.
Sure.
How do we manage that?
Well, I think it's important, again, that you're active in your engagement and that you create a culture. And once you've created that culture of positivity, or you've created that culture, then you're less likely to get that negative engagement. You're less likely to get those negative comments, but they certainly happen. And that's why it's important to have your notifications on and to be active and to be engaged, so that if there is a comment that shouldn't be there, that it gets dismissed, that you're blocking people who might be trolling or any sort of those negative things. But again, once you've established that you are going to engage, that you are a person, that you're not just a business, you're not just an organization, that there's a person on the other side of the computer who's going to talk back to you. This is not just going into the void. This is someone who's going to see what you, once you've established that these are conversations and that these are relationships being built, then you tend to be have less likely to have that negativity going on. But it's certainly going to happen, and you can't control all of it. I tend to kind of approach it with a little bit of humor, or try to throw up a meme that's maybe funny. I saw a political conversation this morning trying to take shape, and I answered it with, you may have already seen it, but there's these photos of the inauguration yesterday of Bernie Sanders. Have you seen those pictures? So he's got on like these knitted mittens, and he's got his mask on, and he's kind of sitting, and the meme that I saw said, this could have been an email, like that's Bernie's internal dialogue. So you can get into the political conversation or whatever by using a little bit of humor that appeals to everyone. I know that a lot of our audience is not going to be Bernie supporters, but it's really not a knock on anybody. It's just kind of, something that's funny that we can all relate to, usually kind of will smooth out those rough edges. And in smaller communities, when someone says something on your social channels, if you don't know them personally, usually you know somebody who does know them. And so it's a little bit harder to hide in these smaller communities because, people know each other. Yeah,
great point. I love it. Okay, let me ask Melissa. Melissa, hi there. How are you?
I'm great.
Melissa, any questions for Callie?
So I do have a couple of questions, and you kind of touched on the one question I would have is that if you do get that negative comment, you can come back with something kind of funny, but if it's more of a serious subject, like if you put information out there about COVID or those kinds of things, and somebody goes negative on you, I mean, maybe just some advice on how you do respond to that negative comment.
Yeah,
it's not an inappropriate comment, and it's part of the conversation, which I welcome different points of views. But if it truly is a negative comment to what you posted, what do you recommend?
So let me make sure I'm following you. So say I posted, hey, come downtown and shop this weekend. And somebody commented, how dare you encourage people to come out and shop when we're in the middle of a pandemic? Is that kind of what you're?
That's probably a good example, yes.
Yeah. So because there's been a lot of that, certainly going on. So, you could do one of two things. You could just let it sit, or you could engage. Typically, I don't find that that's super successful. But if you'll notice, especially on Facebook, when you hit comments and see what people are saying, the first 2 or 3 people kind of drive what the rest of the comments are going to look like. So if the first 2 or 3 people are positive, it's less likely that a negative is going to come in. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
It's kind of groupthink at the end of the day. So if you've established relationships with people who are maybe influencers in your community, in so much as they're super fans, they're on Facebook all the time, if you could start to I guess, shape the conversation with other comments so that people are, so that you're creating that culture of this is a positive place. So it's super helpful to, when you have those fans who are always helpful or always nice, to make sure that you're calling that out, that you're sending them a direct message or sending them a note in the mail or giving them a call, or when you run into them in town, just say, it is so nice that you always say something kind, or I really appreciate that you do that, and to make sure that those people are continuing to do that. I know we've got several of those here that every time I post something, they're Johnny on the spot to say something nice or to try to drive that conversation. And it's usually people that kind of understand how the whole social media algorithm works. But to establish those relationships with people, and maybe kind of almost kind of juicing the comment section by establishing those relationships with other people and making sure that your members or people on your board, or that they're paying attention to social media and they're driving the conversation in a positive way. A lot of times though, those negative comments, they're just going to happen. The good news is that they scroll right down off the screen eventually. So sometimes you just gotta pepper in a whole lot of good to get rid of one bad.
Usually other people kind of take care of the narrative and of the conversation too. So, yeah. And so my other question would be about if you're managing multiple pages. This is something I'm really struggling with.
Okay.
What's your best advice in handling multiple pages?
So again, using a tool like Hootsuite or something that brings all of those pages into one computer screen that you can see, so that you can see all of the streams in one spot. And then making sure that you're setting aside the time to plan and to pre-post. That is super helpful to me. So if I sit down on Monday and I know I'm going to put up 7 days worth of content today, and I've already got my database of photos that I've been building over the weeks, I've already got some content ideas that I've been jotting down throughout the week. And when I sit down to do it, I can pre-post, I can schedule everything in one spot on one screen. So bringing all of those social channels together in one spot is super helpful. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to post the same thing on every channel. You're not going to post the same thing to Twitter as you're going to on Instagram every time, because again, we're thinking about our audience, right? So but they're still right there, and you can see what you have scheduled. You can see where you've got comments, and it's all on one page. So if I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make sure that I want to check all the comments from whatever my morning post was, I can do that in one spot instead of having to open a whole bunch of different tabs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I did not realize that it would show you all your different pages. I knew you could pull in your different apps, but that I definitely learned something today. So thank you.
Yeah, it'll bring in all your pages, and then it'll tell you when you have engagement. So it'll say you've got a message. And it'll show you all your messages on all your channels, but it's showing you in one spot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got to get that, because I'll spend 5 minutes going, oh, I saw that message, but where was it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Hootsuite is a game changer. Or there are a lot of programs like it, but you can get your 30-day trial. And I think monthly for one user, I want to say it's like $29 or something. It's worth it.
Okay. Thanks, Callie.
Sure.
Very cool. Thanks, Melissa, for your questions. Tanya, questions?
Yeah, I had a couple actually. One of them, you had mentioned you got some billboards. So I wondered, did you have any suggestions for research in creating a marketing plan, and what you would suggest someone to do if they wanted to branch into using billboards or everything? And how's the best way, because there's so many options out there, what's the best way to formulate a plan?
So a plan on placement or a plan on content, or both?
Both. Where, if somebody wants to see how the best way to focus where they should put their advertising in and how to plan it out.
Okay, so It would really just kind of depend on what strategy you want to use. So what I learned that I didn't know before is that when you buy a billboard or when you rent the billboard, you rent the space, you're also buying the vinyl, which is yours to keep. So once your vinyl comes down, now you own it. So, but at least in the experience that I've just had, so say you rent a billboard for 4 weeks. If no one comes behind you and rents the week after that, you just stay up. So now you've paid for 4 weeks, but you've got 5. So if no one comes behind you after that, you just stay up. So my strategy was, how do I get the most bang for my buck? So as I was working with the billboard guy, I was like, which ones of these billboards are least likely to get rented? So you can do it that way if you want to just figure out, I just want to stay up as long as possible and really stretch your dollar. And that's the approach that I used. So they're just kind of all over the place and not necessarily a strategy at all about location or exit here or, you know, whatever. They're very generic. I can send the file to Rishu if you just want to see all of the billboards, but they just say visit Carthage, and they're just really beautiful artwork, and we'll be able to use them for years to come. And when they come down and they, you know, and they're in my office, we can figure out a way to use them again. So that was my strategy, was to figure out a way to make dollar stretch the furthest. So yeah, I did not have a strategy about necessarily placement, except that I just kind of did a radius around, I think I did 120 miles or 150 miles or something around Carthage. But it's other than visit Carthage, that's it, that's all it says. So it's just super generic and, but really beautiful. It's super eye-catching. But yeah, I have some that I could stay up for like a year because I chose the ones that are least likely to sell. That was my strategy.
Great, thank you.
That
Danny, any other
sounds like a
questions?
good plan. I actually do have, and I had another come in. So my other question was, do you have a planning template that you use for all of your social media?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to call out Hootsuite again. They have marketing calendars built into that, and they also have a free training that really is helpful, and my staff has used it, and that helps you not only learn how to use their platform, but really a lot of just marketing basics with regard to when to post, depending on your audience or depending on your content. You know, I learned a lot about our audience and that we should probably post a lot of things on Sunday morning for some reason, because that's what the algorithm is showing. But Hootsuite taught us how to read that algorithm in a way that we would know when to post things. So there's a marketing calendar built in there, but there are lots of marketing calendar templates that you can download for free all over the internet. Highly, highly recommend using those, and to be pre-planning your posting as much as possible. You know, if you know you've got an event in October, you've already got that on your marketing calendar, and you've already decided when those posts are going to go up and what at least some of the content is going to be as much as possible. The pre-planning on the social media is just very, very important.
Okay, and then I had one last question that came in. So you had mentioned some negative comments and stuff. Do you actively try to drive positive reviews from the community to help show on the Facebook, you know, what people think about that, and what kind of strategy do you use for that without it coming across as insincere?
Right. So, and that's why it's so important to build those relationships and to think about it as relationship building rather than marketing per se, that it's not a one-way conversation, that you're trying to create a conversation that is meaningful and that there is engagement. When someone posts a positive review and I know who that is, or I can see through channels that somebody I know knows who that person, I try to go out of my way to remember to say thank you, that I appreciate it. And then that really starts to drive more of those positive reviews, more of those positive comments. When the person who has left that positive review or left that positive comment knows that you've seen it, knows that it was important to you, knows that you appreciate it, those people tend to come back over and over and over, because they, again, you've built a relationship now and you're saying, hey, what you did was important. What you did made an impact on my organization or made an impact on my business. I really appreciate it. And building those relationships and building that trust really helps drive those positive positive comments and positive reviews. And then it's just kind of a snowball.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Looks like we're close to the top of the hour, and I did, that's Callie is the right,
Yeah, that's one of them. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Nicely done. So that's the billboard that you've been using. There's one question that came on the chats, and well, we can answer this and we'll wrap it up. And it's from Kelly Johnston in Aurora. So I'm going to read what he said. So the idea that you talked about earlier of having 1 hour per week for social doesn't jive with the idea of commenting on every response to support active engagement. How do you keep social engagement from becoming all-consuming?
Unfortunately, marketing is kind of all day, every day, and it's important to have those notifications on. The good news is, we talked about at the beginning, if you don't necessarily have those resources do exist within your community. I promise you. And so if you just pay attention to the people who are really good at engaging on social media, that are on all the Facebook pages all the time, maybe form a relationship with that person and say, hey, if I made you an editor on my page, would you, as you're moving through your day, as you're on Facebook several times a day, would you mind kind of hearting the or liking or engaging in some manner on my behalf? Find those trusted individuals that already love being on social media, that you'd be surprised how many of those people would probably love to be an editor on your page, and and give some parameters, obviously, but to have those relationships with your fellow community. I promise they exist. So you may just start to watch and kind of figure out who engages a lot, and those people, if they're engaging a lot, it's something that they really like to do. So finding those people that are passionate about it and are good at it, they exist. There are lots of them. So I would say use your community and find some partners that would be happy to help you if you just ask. And but yeah, you're right. It's a good call that that engaging constantly does not jive with the 1 hour a week. That is absolutely true. The 1 hour a week that I was referring to was just sitting down and putting all of your content together and making sure that you got it scheduled and ready to go. So, but yeah, I would encourage you to create some partnerships and find those people that are good at it and are passionate about it, and let them do it for you.
Very cool. All right, Callie, we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to just summarize what I heard as the key points. Number one, know your audience. That's going to drive all your work. Two is quality. Quality matters. Even if you're doing a little bit, or don't do a lot, if you can maintain quality. Do little, and quality is better than a lot that's lacks in quality. Third is do something. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to try things out, and just keep experimenting to see. There may be unintuitive things like the billboard strategy that work really well for you, and you may find and discover new opportunities there, which is great. Book out time. Book time to do this. If you kind of put it towards as the last thing you'll do on any day, then you'll never get to it. So really carving out time to manage marketing, social media, using the tool like the Hootsuite seems like a really, really powerful tool. Relationships. Build relationships on social media platforms with others, and then sort of create that camaraderie, so that again, when issues, negative comments, and some of those issues come up, having a buffer of strong supporters that are supportive of the work that's going on will in some ways help continually create positivity for the work that's going on. Did I capture some of the ideas clearly, Callie? Is that what you're highlighting?
You did great.
Okay, great. Well, Callie, thank you so much for your insights, your expertise. We really appreciate it. I'm sure our chamber leaders appreciate it, and certainly the business leaders that are in the different communities. We appreciate everyone who joined us for the conversation. Please do share the posting with anyone else that you think may be interested. And we will, in fact, have another marketing conversation next month. For more details, you can find the recording of today's event and upcoming events on business911.org. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you again, Callie. Thank you, chamber leaders. Take care. We'll talk to you. Bye.